Well, in September 2019, I got into my little Kia Picanto with pretty much everything I owned in the back, and I had my bike on the top, on the roof. And it looked ridiculous because my bike was about as big as my car. I hit the road from Wimbledon, where I've been living for 2 years, working at a church, travelling west to GL51 Cheltenham. I'd got a job being part of the chaplaincy team at Dean Close School, just up the road. For the 4 years previous, I'd been working in 2 different churches. I'd never worked in a school before, let alone a private boarding school. To be honest, it was all a bit terrifying. I was moving to a new job in a place I'd never been before. I didn't really know anyone in Cheltenham. The only person I knew of, didn't really know, was someone called Nathan Yulton, who I'm sure many of you will know. You may have come across him. As I said, it was quite a scary experience, stepping into the unknown. And to be honest, I didn't really want to leave Wimbledon. I'd settled really well there. I'd made good friends. I was really enjoying my ministry there. But I felt that God was leading me somewhere else, and that somewhere was Cheltenham. It certainly was a time when I needed to trust in God, trust in His plans for me. And of course, at times, I found that really difficult. If I'm honest, there were times when I really struggled to trust in God's plans. Sometimes God calls us to follow Him into the unknown, taking us away from what is comfortable, from what is secure. I wonder if you can look back at times in your lives where you've followed God into the unknown. Perhaps being here today, you're in that very space. Maybe you're here at Hester's Way Baptist Church for the first time. Perhaps you're looking into Christianity for the first time. You feel like you're stepping into the unknown. If that is you, you're very welcome here. And I'm sorry I'm not able to say hello in person, but I'm sure there's many people here who would love to say hello and get to know you. In Mark chapter 9, verse 34, Jesus says this: "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it. But whoever loses their life for me and the gospel will save it." These incredibly challenging words from Jesus to his disciples. In these words of Jesus, we see that following him means denying ourselves. It means putting Jesus and others before our own wants, our own desires, and our own needs. Even if it means losing our own lives, Jesus says we will be saved. What we're going to be doing at church over the next few weeks is going through a series, thinking about the idea of what it means to deny ourselves, what it means to take up our cross and follow Jesus. We're going to have a look at 7 different people in the Bible who lived in this way. People who chose to follow God's way rather than their own. Putting their own wants, their own desires, their own needs to one side and following God's call. Trusting in him to provide all that they needed. And on the last week, we will look at Jesus. Jesus, the perfect example of self-denial. And of course, at times in the weeks before, we will think about Jesus, but more completely and specifically on that last week. Just before these words in Mark chapter 9, Jesus predicts his death. And he does this because he's showing his disciples what true self-denial actually looks like. Jesus was ready to suffer. Jesus was ready to give his life for the sake of others, for his disciples, for the world, for you and for me. Jesus isn't someone who calls us to just give up everything for him, to be willing to suffer for him and then not do the same himself. Jesus is not someone who is far away, tells us what to do from the comfort of heaven. No, Jesus came down to earth. He grew up as a normal human being. He knew the struggles and the strains of everyday life, and he knew suffering. And ultimately, he knew death itself. The first example we're going to be looking at today is of Abraham. Now, I'm sure most of you have heard of Abraham, and if not all. There's a song that many of you might have heard before that goes, Father Abraham had many sons, and it goes on. And you might want to pause the video there and maybe sing that together. You probably don't want to do that. But Abraham is a central person, excuse me, in the Old Testament story. He's often referred to as the father of Israel. Abraham, excuse me, Abraham was someone who God called to follow him in some really quite radical ways. We're going to have a look at two things to do with Abraham. The first, God's call on Abraham's life. If you've got a Bible open in front of you, please do turn to Genesis chapter 12, where it says this. The Lord had said to Abraham, "Go from your country, your people and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." In these verses, we see God calling Abraham to leave his country, to leave his home, to go to the land that God will lead him to. I don't know how you would respond if you were in Abraham's shoes. If God spoke to you and asked you to leave your home and go to a new land. Tomorrow morning you wake up and he says, "Leave, follow me. I'm going to take you to a new land." Would you go? It's not even specified by God where this land is. But this call on Abraham's life is not one that is empty. It comes with a promise. In fact, many promises. A promise of land, of descendants, of blessing, of redemption. One of protection from those who curse him. This is the first we see of Abraham. Before this, in chapter 11, we see kind of the family tree, how we get to Abraham. This is the first time we see him having an encounter with God. He's called by God. He's given his promises. And what does he do? He goes. Picking up at verse 4. So Abraham went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abraham was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, all the possessions they had accumulated, and the people they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan and arrived there. Abraham was 75 years old at this point. He might just want to sit and rest and relax. He's getting on a bit. But he leaves. He does just as God has told him. He follows, he obeys. He was ready and willing to follow God's call into the unknown, into the unfamiliar. He, his wife, Sarai, his nephew Lot, his possessions, and some people from their hometown, leaving everything else behind. I've often thought of Abraham as someone who left everything, literally everything, and went off on his own. But if you actually read it, he took some things, some people. But the point is, they and their possessions leave their home and follow God into the unknown. For Abraham to deny himself and follow God, it meant leaving home. It meant following God into the unknown, with the promises of God, but no clarity about how they would come about or where he was going. This is what's written about Abraham in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 8. Do turn to it if you'd like to. It says this: by faith, when called to go to a place where he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith, he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. And it goes on to say, and so from this one man, and he as good as dead, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and as countless as the sand on the seashore. All these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they knew they were foreigners and strangers on earth. People who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had the opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. Do you see in those verses that Abraham is called and he goes even though he doesn't know where he's going? He knows that the city God has promised him, the place God has promised him, God is the architect and the builder. He had these promises of descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, as sand on the shore. And actually, Abraham didn't actually get this promised land. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance. Instead, they were longing for something better. A better country, a heavenly one. The second thing to see about Abraham is the test of Abraham. If you turn back to Genesis chapter 22, it wasn't enough for Abraham to leave his home and follow God into the unknown. Abraham's faith in God's promises was tested. In Genesis 22, it says this: sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, "Abraham?" "Here I am," he replied. Then God said, "Take your son, your only son who you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain that I will show you." Now, I'm sure that many of us will know what happens next in this story. It's a very well-known story. But I wonder how we might have expected Abraham to respond if we came to it fresh, if we didn't know how he responds. Perhaps we'd expect Abraham to say, "God, are you serious? This is my only son, and you want me to sacrifice him? This son is a miracle of you, God. My wife, Sarah, she was too old to get pregnant, but by a miracle she did. Now you want me to kill this son? Is this a joke?" But no. we see as the story goes on, Abraham gets up in the next morning. And verse 6, he took the wood for the burnt offering. Isaac carried it. He had a fire and knife. Isaac says to his father, "The fire and wood are here, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham answered, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." And they go on. When they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. Abraham does as God asks of him. He was even willing to sacrifice his one and only son, trusting that God would provide, trusting in God's promises. But as we see, this angel appears to him from heaven and says, "Abraham, Abraham." "Here I am," he replied. "Do not lay a hand on the boy. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." And he finds a ram caught by its horns. And the ram is sacrificed instead of Isaac. And Abraham called that place, "The Lord will provide." And because Abraham was obedient to what God had asked of him, he's given another promise of blessing, of offspring, as numerous as the stars in the sky, as sand on the beach. In Hebrews again, chapter 11, verse 17, it says, "By faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had embraced the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though God had said to him, 'It is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned.' Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead. And so, in a manner of speaking, he did receive Isaac back from death." Abraham trusted in God, even though it meant leaving his home and following God into the unknown, even though it meant being ready to sacrifice his own son. Now, it's all well and good reading these stories that we find in the Bible, where we see other people following God, other people leaving things behind, other people surrendering things to him. And we might read these stories and say, "Cool, well done, Abraham. Abraham trusted God. God, thank you for Abraham." And we forget about ourselves. What about us? I wonder how you would have responded had you been in Abraham's shoes. I'm not sure what I would have done, if I'm honest. What we see here in Abraham's story is that trusting in God often requires leaving behind comfort and security. It means trusting in God's faithfulness when we surrender what we love most. I wonder what God is calling you and me to leave behind. I wonder what our Isaacs might be. What is it that God is saying, "Surrender this to me"? Perhaps it's material possessions. Maybe it's comfort and convenience. Maybe it's the approval of others. Maybe it's our pride. Maybe it's the things we fear. Maybe it's bitterness. We're holding on. We're resenting someone or something. Maybe it's the sinful habits, the ones that only we know about. Maybe it's surrendering, being able to know fully what the future holds, as if we even do anyway. Our personal plans, our ambitions. God calls us to leave everything behind, to follow him, even if that means stepping into the unknown. Back in 2019, when I left Wimbledon in my small Kia Picanto and drove west, I was a bit fearful, I was a bit sad to leave where I was. And at times, as I said earlier, there's been moments when I've really struggled to trust in God's promises. But my testimony is that God has been with me through all things. God has provided for me in ways I never would have imagined. When we trust in God, He is faithful. He gives us promises which He is faithful to as we follow Him. Promises of His presence, His help in times of trouble, His love, His forgiveness, His future hope of heaven, which is our hope. God calls you today to follow Him. Will you say with Abraham, "Here I am"? What might God be calling you to surrender to Him today, this week? Will you trust Him enough to give Him everything, as He has given everything for us? Amen.